Welcome to the initial budget meeting, executive budget workshop. May I have the roll?
Mayor Betty Rash,
Here.
Vice Mayor Christopher McVoy,
Present.
Commissioner Sarah Maliga,
Here.
Commissioner Kimberly Stokes,
Here.
Commissioner Ronaldo Diaz.
Here.
Thank you. The pledge of the flag will be read by Sarah Maliga.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Much easier when you're live than via Zoom.
Oh, it's, being on Zoom is not any substitute for being on. Well, welcome to our second round of budget, beginning of the budget process. Madam City Manager, would you take it away?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, this is my first
All right.
city budget process, so I'm excited about that. And so today we're going through a preliminary overview. And this is my first introduction of the budget. So we want to make this a discussion point. We want to show you where we are at this time of our reviewing after we've taken time with each department and receiving their requests, their supplemental budget requests, going over the capital improvement programs. We have crafted a preliminary budget submission for our fiscal year 2023 budget year. And so the approach we are taking in this budget year is certainly a very mindful and fiscally conservative approach into this budget. As you know, our current economic climate in the country is very fragile, as there's much discussion of a possible recession by the end of the year, if not next year, which will still be within our budget year. And then also inflation and all the other challenges that we're still facing, particularly the COVID pandemic, which we all wish was over, but unfortunately, it still exists, and we still need to be mindful about that and how it impacts not only our daily lives, but also how we operate as a city. And so not going to take up too much time because we want to go through the preliminary assumptions and other considerations that would impact our budget this year and what we have considered as we presented to you today, the initial submission. So I will turn it over to our finance director, Mr. Bruce Miller, who will go through the making of our preliminary budget.
Good evening.
Good evening. Ready to rock and roll?
Ready to rock and roll. And we had some comments from people listening outside. You really, for those microphones, need to keep your mouths very close to the microphones, or it just doesn't come through to the outside.
And Madam Mayor, may I say
Ooh,
that I don't like.
it feels like my knees.
And I apologize.
See your knees.
I do want to say publicly for our listening audience that we do have better quality mics on order, and they're in process to be shipped. So please be patient with us. We have heard your cry, and we are making improvements to the sound system of the chamber.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. Yeah. So before I begin, I would be remiss not to thank, everybody knows Andre, but I don't believe everybody has had the opportunity to meet Lucy. Lucy is the new budget director. Our previous, not director, but budget manager, left in mid-February, I think. And Lucy has been able to pick up the pieces from there and move forward. So just like to reach out and say thank you to both of them.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I also would like to note that we are much further ahead in the budget calendar than we have been since I've been here anyway. We normally would be doing this in mid-July.
Right.
We're receiving tax information, property tax information from the county. So I think we have a great opportunity this year to And the purpose of tonight is to go through preliminary budget, knowing full well that there's going to be numbers that change. This is very, very preliminary, and I just want to make sure everybody understands that there's going to be some fluidity in this document. And I'll go through that as we move forward. I would also like to mention that because of the scope and breadth of this document, anybody who wants to get into a deeper dive individually, our offices are always open, and I please, and I ask you, I'd like you to take the time, if you have it, of course, to meet with me and Lucy and Andre, so that we can go through and answer any of your questions. I think it's being much more deliberative in the process. Our next two budget presentations will be on the governmental funds. Soup to nuts, Stantec will be participating in that. And then the one thereafter will be on the enterprise funds, primarily the utilities. And again, Stantec will be doing what if scenarios. I think you may recall them doing that before. So if we increase a utility rate or whatever we may do, you can see the impact that would flow through. Then I'm hoping that we will have all of August to do deep dives wherever you wish to go. That once you identify an area that you would like to get into a little bit more discussion and detail, then you'll have this meeting, our individual one-on-ones, the two Stantec modeling, and then give us August to finalize any of the issues and concerns that you may have. So by September, we can have the budget that represents the wishes of the commissioners. So that's the broad calendar, if you will. So starting off, I provided you a little cheat sheet. The preliminary budget assumptions, the budget is prepared, again, using very, very early assumptions. The budget will change. I think I mentioned that, and I probably will be redundant on that point. So some of the things that we know that will be changing going forward. The tax rate is finalized until July. So we really won't have hard property tax information until that time.
Do we have any sort of a prediction that
Not at this time.
if we assumed it was about the same increase as last year, what would that be?
Well, I'll.
It's on here.
Okay.
On the next page,
You're jumping in there.
Mr. Boyd.
No one to do that.
All right, the general liability insurance.
Yeah, that's scary.
We went with a 7% increase. We met with the, with our insurance consultant last week. And he mentioned the fact that we're going to be eventually looking at 15 to 20%. So once we get those final increase, we'll go ahead and plug that in. But again, that will have a negative impact on the budget.
Let me ask you a question. Are we self-insured? We're still in that, what's the name of that group? That,
The Gary's, Gary's,
oh,
there's been a few is, I forget the name. Oh.
there's not a municipal group where we're with a regular agency.
We
We have Lauren coming up
Yeah, there's like, I'm sorry, Lauren Sladen.
Directly.
closer.
Sorry. I also just called on it. So there's only a few, we are self-insured, but of course it's administered through insurance.
Okay.
company. Right now, our TPA is Gallagher Bassett, and the policies for our excess coverage run through Pidget for Government Insurance Trust.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So again, when those final percentages will flow the numbers through the budget with that. Health insurance, we have a 0% increase, which is good news.
Amazing,
Really?
amazing.
Yeah. But, what I want to do is just make sure that what we are appropriating dollar wise is really equal to, and that's not going through a 0% increase. And so I need to check out, some supplemental information, subsequent information, including the, IBNR, which is inferred but not reported. There's a lag,
IBNR?
right? There's a lag between when somebody actually, goes to the hospital, files a claim,
Oh,
and
okay.
by the time we get the bill to pay it.
Okay.
And that's incurred but not reported.
Okay.
IBNR.
Encouraged.
So I just want to make sure that it's all reconciled out. There's a little discrepancies in the vehicle chargebacks for the different departments. We have a internal service fund, a drive fund that handles all the fleet, the city fleet. And we just want to reconcile, making sure all departments have the accurate inventory. And then once we know that we have an accurate inventory, then we can make sure that the budget allocations are accurate. So we need a little bit more work on that. I don't see a major swing, but there will be a little bit of variability with that. The general employee pension plan, the actuarial has not been completed as of yet. It has been for police and fire. The good news on police and fire, they did not go up. And I think fire went down a little bit actually. So, and that's because the returns on the investments were so good.
Yeah.
So you have a 5-year average, and even with that 5-year averaging, our liability for this year stayed constant, relatively constant. So that's good news. And I'm hoping that it will be the same for the general employee pension, but until I get that actuarial, I really don't know. It'll probably go up around 3%, but that's already baked in as part of the salary increases. So that increase is already taken care of. The IT chargeback needs a little bit, and that's the IT is also an internal service fund. And they charge all the different departments their share, depending upon the number of computers, the software, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So she wants a little bit more time. Nellie wants a little bit more time just to verify some numbers and clean that up a little bit. And again, I don't expect a major rewrite. The one thing that could potentially impact it is that as part of a supplemental budget request, Nellie is looking for an additional staff member potentially. So that by doing that, that will fill the room. Debt service, as you know, we're going to be issuing a new bond this week. And depending upon what that interest rate is and what the amortization schedules are, that will change what the our assumptions are. Again, I don't expect material changes, but it will change. And finally, the sheriff's contract. Currently, I budgeted for a 3% increase, but as that is deliberated more and more, we're hoping that that may come down. But
I would like to just make a statement on that. I think last year was very disappointing that only the city manager and mayor were involved in any of the conversations around the contract until it came to us for a vote. I think it's important that we all have input in this process.
I want to correct you though. I had no,
Oh,
no, I didn't have any.
okay. Well, I thought.
The only thing I
the city
would,
manager at the time said, oh, but the mayor and I met with them and we did,
the meeting was, just so you, I'm glad that you said that.
you know,
The meeting was, the sheriff's office said, we're gonna only raise you 3% this year. Or 2, whatever it was last year. And we said, oh, okay, we didn't talk about the contract, we didn't talk about anything substantive.
well, I think we have to be very
So
careful.
I just want to know, you to know
Okay,
that, yeah.
thank you. But, you know, because of the new law that the governor had signed in this year, the last year, if when we increase the contract, if we do fall into hard times next year, we can't pull it back.
Yeah.
So we need to have some serious conversations around this, but I hope that we're all involved.
Mayor, if I may say, I certainly will keep you all informed as to the progress and discussion with the sheriff's office.
Yeah, I'm sorry you had that impression.
So did I.
I'll keep you all involved.
Really?
Yeah.
No, it was one meeting and it was like, we're gonna raise it, but not as much as we thought we were. We didn't talk about content or anything about anything.
Okay, well, yeah, I would iterate, and the city manager and I.
I'm so glad you said that. Really?
This year, I want the discussion about the rates and the contract to be substantive content of the contract as well as the cost of the contract.
Yes, and I spoke to each one of you, and each one of you had some thoughts and input as to some of the things you wish to see in the contract. And so I've taken those notes and we'll be meeting with the sheriff's office soon and scheduling a discussion and incorporating some of the thoughts that you've shared with me as we walk through what's involved in the contract.
Sounds good. But you never know what's out there. That's so scary, really. Because that would make me feel bad too. If you thought I was like doing our contract.
Sorry, continue.
Sorry.
No problem. Thank you. So, the one thing another point I would like to emphasize, and Carmen mentioned this at the very beginning, is building our budgets on, conservative principles. The one thing I am continuing to have concern about is because we are pretty much maxed out on our tax rate levy capacity. What happens when, and I don't think it's an if, it's a when, the values, property values decrease.
Mm.
Or even hold the same. Over the last, since I think since fiscal year 12, we have been averaging 10% increases in our property value.
And annual increase.
Yes.
That's quite a jump. Yeah.
So it's only a matter of time, that cannot be sustained.
Right.
You know, so when that starts slowing down, or when property values, back about the upcoming economics, decrease, our budget will decrease with it. Our revenue generation will decrease.
Would it be prudent for us then to think about, let's do a budget that's a little less than what we expect to get?
Well, that's what we would like the conversation
Okay,
to start. And start putting away some
right.
rainy day funds so that when the time does come, there's a savings account, so to speak, that we can go to facilitate. The problem is, you know, when those times come, there's going to be a structural issue as we move forward, that we just have to understand that going forward so we can build our fiscal policies around that. And if it doesn't happen, great.
That's great.
Right.
Yeah, that's
We have a-
great.
we have a-
Feeling sorry.
Right.
Now you have more money than you thought for capital or whatever the case may be. But going forward, I think we just have to keep that in the back of my mind. All right, so the budgetary parameters that the budget was built upon. First of all, it's a zero-based budget. And all zero-based really means is you start each line number. You know, back here, you'll see individual line numbers. You start with 0 for each one. And then you build, I need 10 pencils, I need X. And then you substantiate what it is in that budget. And so when the policymakers or the public at large is asking, well, what is in this line number? We have the information to say what's in that line number. We have a $5,000 threshold. And there's some accounts such as training, not training, I'm sorry, like some of the utilities, water, sewer, that kind of things. That's just based on prior year activity. I'm not asking to know how many kilowatt hours you use or how many gallons we flush. et cetera, et cetera. So we just base that on prior year activities. Whereas there are other accounts such as professional services, contract, that kind of thing, that we really want a good, hard delineated compilation of expenses, of potential expenses. And then if there's anything $5,000 we're under, say for office supplies and that kind of stuff, again, and I don't want people to count the number of paper and pencils. The juice is not worth the squeeze on that. So anyway, so that's basically the foundation, so that when we move and create the budget, we really understand what those line numbers are and why we're. And it's not just, well, it was this last year, we'll just use that same number. The second principle is it's a level service budget. Knowing that the costs will increase, because again, salaries increase. So the reality is that these line numbers are going to increase year over year. So the first cut, if you will, in the budget is a level service budget. We're doing the same, we're providing the same services, same programs that we did last year. And if there's any changes because of budgetary constraints, we'll have those conversations. But the first presentation is a level service budget.
I know that we're doing overview and stuff, but if I'm understanding correctly, we, for a variety of reasons, we don't have a lot of extra leeway to say, hey, we want to do these new things or those new things. So if the commission has priorities that they say the city needs to do these things, needs to provide these activities, whatever they are. If I'm understanding correctly, that basically means we need to rejuggle that level of service, that we may say, okay, our priorities are XYZ is pretty important and ABC needs to tamp down 10% or whatever the numbers are. And that's not a fun sort of discussion for anybody. That's not an easy thing to do. If you got a bunch of extra money and you want to do new things, that's great, but we don't, for the most part. I guess what I'm wondering in the process, how do we, as a commission, weigh in on the redirecting that is going to be not easy?
Well,
If there, maybe we don't want to change it. Everything's fine the way we're doing it. Let's just do the same. That's possible, but
I think you made a great segue into the next bullet.
I was ahead again.
Yeah, stop reading.
And anything above and beyond last year's budget, we've asked the department heads to submit a supplemental budget request.
Mhm.
And I would recommend working with finance and city manager to pre-prepare in that format a supplemental budget request. So we can include it in the other requests that were presented by the departments and then rank what needs to be done. It will be very, very hard come August to say, raise your hand and say, why don't we talk about this or why don't we talk about this? Because the reality is just the closer we get to September, the more pressure we're going to be under to adopt something. Okay, so if we come up and present a supplemental request, and again, we'll be more than happy to work with you on that. And get that into the queue, then it can be evaluated with all the other requests that will be considered.
Yeah, this list, this compilation is very helpful because we know kind of what they are looking for. That was helpful. City manager?
Yes, and if I can add to that, it's also linked to what we've gone through on the at the priorities workshop as
Mhm.
we went through that exercise. And of course, the purpose of that was to determine the priorities of the commission and how that would tie and affect the budget. So that leads me into just giving you a preview that within the next week, I'll be submitting to you the results of that exercise and how it all shook out concerning the priorities. And I can tell you that the top four priorities from the workshop, the priorities workshop was infrastructure, development, environmental sustainability, and quality of life issues. And so, so when you get that information, that will most likely spark the discussions that you have regarding priorities. It will probably lead you to get more specific as to what you would like to see under those particular priorities. And then we can discuss how that folds into the budget and how we reappropriate funding to those priorities. So within the week, you'll have that. And so the next discussion we'll have, or particularly on maybe our one-on-ones, and then also with the public discussions, we can talk about those priorities and how they fit into the budget. So that'll address your question that you had, Commissioner McVoy, on what if we have some programs or some other priorities that are not part of this preliminary submission.
Yeah, I guess it's just that one can make a case, I don't know if it's fully true, but one can make a case that one of the most important things that the elected body does is decide direction of what happens in the city.
Absolutely.
And the way you decide direction is what do you fund and what do you not fund,
That's
or
right.
what do you fund more, what do you fund less? And one thing that I think we've discussed a little bit is I would encourage an approach where each of the departments does a certain amount of a self-evaluation, and the suggestion that I made to you, I think, was have each department sort of make an assessment of how do they think the public in the community perceives the work that's being done in that area. Do they themselves, are they aware of things that they hear a lot from the public, boy, I wish there was more of this or less of that or whatever it is. And we also independently answer the same question so that we have a sense of how are we doing? Independently evaluated both by the budget, the department directors, and by ourselves. And we see if there's any consistency and use that to help guide, okay, we need to beef up a little more here, or this is doing pretty well, maybe squeeze that slightly and use that over here a little bit more. We need some basis other than just what it costs. We need also the need and how we're doing.
Right, and that's what we generally do. Each department submit their requests based on activities and the projected issues that they see that have been part of what they do every day. And that
So
also
different, though. What I'm looking for is a self-evaluation at the department level of what's their perception of how this is working in the community, and then what's our perception? And we do it, I would do it by department because I don't know any better way to do it, but could be by topics or kinds of services, or, you could do it a couple different ways, but seems like departments.
But it depends, because, as you know, some departments are more internal service than external service.
Right.
So certainly those departments that are serving in the public more so, yes, I can see how that will work, and we certainly can do that. It may be a little different from some of the internal service.
Yes.
But I mean, don't you think we have great feedback from the citizens that we have? I mean, sitting here, don't you think we have a pretty good idea of what our citizens are looking for? I guess my question is without, and I apologize, but it came up. How are you, a survey?
Hmm?
I mean, how?
I would, there are a lot of different ways
Well,
you could do
what are you
it.
suggesting?
What I'm suggesting is do it by the staff internally saying, okay, Department X, this is our sense of what we think the public feels about how this one is doing, that they would like to see more of whatever, they said, like to see less of whatever, or it's great the way it is, or whatever it is. a self-assessment that way. And then we, as a commission, independently do that as well. And that, you know, you build it up. I love spreadsheets. Commissioner Maliga knows
Isn't that what they're doing by giving us these supplemental
No,
requests?
that's,
I have-
well, by the supplement request maybe, but
So if, you know, we just had a long conversation about our code compliance team. So if William and Yolanda, and they're hearing, well, we want to be able to assist our residents more in coming into code compliance. They're hearing from that. And I'm guessing they're going back and saying, well, in order to do that, I'm gonna need this.
Mhm.
So I think what we're missing is if they request a position, the why behind it. So we just get, you know, thrown a bunch of these requests. They all came from them listening to us. And then, so it's a lot of stuff in people's heads and not really connected.
explicit.
I'm thinking that maybe what you're looking for is, this is why William requested this extra position, because he heard from the commission that this is a priority to be able to fulfill.
And that's
this need.
already in the budget right now.
But the why is the why in there?
The why is very important because we're gonna have a difficult job of saying activity X in the city is gonna have to get scaled back because activity Y is clearly gonna have more happening. And those are not, we don't have extra resources to do it. So it's gonna be something where if something goes up and we say, all right, we're gonna do more code enforcement, we're all gonna look at each other and say, okay, are we gonna pay less in the PDSO contract? Or are we gonna pay less to this department, that, because we don't have any extra pots to mount anything.
Well, let me also highlight the supplemental budget will give you the whys.
Well,
Yes, so when you look at,
Under, it says provided description.
Mhm. Yeah, it does.
I don't remember it doing that last
Yeah.
year.
Yeah, I think this
the
is.
supplemental budget enhanced request general fund, you'll see the department that requests what their request is, the amount, and they
Tell you
provide
why.
a description of the purpose of that request.
Yeah.
So,
So we can dig into this more in our one-on-ones and then
and you'll see.
revisit this if we think there's something missing.
Right, and so much discussion has been had on many issues. Like you mentioned, Commissioner Stokes, that the meeting we had about code enforcement. Of course, you all laid out certainly a lot of good ideas of what we can do to enhance customer service related to that. And so the team is already at work, putting some things in place. And there were a lot of things that weren't very expensive to do. It may cost some supplies. And so we're putting those things in motion and they'll be folded into the budget as needed. Just like we talked about some programming to help those who need assistance to comply with the code. Those are some easy fixes that we can put a program together and related to funding that, as we talked about, ARPA funds. So we listen to what you say. And we definitely fold those ideas into the budget and the team work to implement those as best we can. And if there is a greater need or a larger request based on that particular item, we of course put it into a supplemental request. And I know, for instance, another example is we talked about the need for sustainability requests. You'll see that in here. That came from listening to the
Great.
commissioners. And so
The mobility plan is
the
in here.
mobility plan in the supplemental. So
Everything we asked.
everything as much as we can think of,
That was-
as we hear from you, from the dais, we put it in here. Yes, some of these items are the cost of them as a collective is more than our resources we have available. So then that means we have to dig in and now prioritize.
Right.
So we can match funding to the items to our availability. So that will be the discussion that we'll certainly have to dig into and sort out as we move through this process. And more is gonna come because we're gonna talk about the top priorities, the priorities that we talked about as far as our strategic plan, and that will tie into the budget. So there's much more to talk about, and all these are based on trying to provide the needed services for the community. And of course, the challenge is working that within the resources that we have. So much more discussion and certainly here, we hear, we listen, and we try to accommodate as best we can within our.
That's good too, because if you hadn't said that, we would know that.
Yeah.
About putting the sustainability coordinator and that's.
Yeah, and you'll see it all in your package.
That's why we need a grant writer.
And we have that in process. We have that in process.
Find the money,
You'll
find the
get a
money.
Report soon on the progress of that,
Right.
that.
Find the money, find the money. Okay. Moving forward.
Moving forward. Okay, if you would turn to page 2.
Yeah.
Just talk about revenue or something real quick. So I think I mentioned the fact that the property taxes, that's not gonna be out until early July. Right now we have a 6% increase. Hopefully, that amount will be higher than the 6%. And we may have a little bit more cushion, to do the things that we're talking about. Then the CRA, amount is predicated on the same. So, and then we transfer out that money. So that's all intermingled. The intergovernmental pass-throughs, is really based on prior year's activities. So, it's just looking at prior years, seeing what's going on. It's hard to really, we don't get firm estimates on those either. It's based on activity. So, we receive whatever is passed through. We get passed through for whatever we receive.
Like county funds, I don't really, I guess I don't know what intergovernmental pass-throughs are.
They're the monies that come down from the county for taxes and that kind of
Okay.
stuff.
Thank you.
And I have a slide that we'll get into more of that so you can see that. Local receipts, again, that's based on activity, prior year activity, talking to department heads and saying what they think is gonna happen. I.e. is building going into a boom or they slowing down, and then we adjust the income accordingly. Bond and franchise fees, that's based on the 8% of total income. And that was, as per policy, we've been doing, the city's been doing that for a while now. The indirect chargebacks, again, for policy as predicated as a percentage of budget. Not just up your operating budget, but the capital budget, and then allocating the expenditures from the departments listed below because they all provide services to those different funds. And then the expense assumptions, salaries increased 3%. That's based on the union negotiations. There are no new positions reflected, and that will be captured in the supplemental budget request. So again, this is just a level service budget from last year, and we're gonna have to identify what we do from there.
Does that include the positions that we approved in last year's budget but have not been filled yet?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
Yes.
Thank
And
you.
that's the sustainability and the, what is that?
No,
Which was the,
leisure services.
well, I know leisure services, yeah, but what?
Leisure, yes, assistant director for leisure services and
Grant.
Grant writer.
Grant writer, and then Jessica's position being
Right.
filled. Okay.
We did not eliminate, if there are vacant positions, they're still being funded.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
good.
Do we have a vacant position in the IT department or not? Because I keep getting confused that we had an opening for the director or an opening for an assistant director.
The director's money was used to make adjustments to the current staffing. And then she's requesting an additional person. And then, again, that would be part of the supplemental budget request. Okay, defining benefits, pension costs. Again, we talked about the actuarial evaluation, which defines the art and required contribution. That's not been determined yet. Defining contribution pension, that's primarily for the directors and those who choose not to participate in the city's plan. So that's just a function of if you get a 3% increase or a 2% increase, and so too does the contribution increase by that amount. Health insurance is 0% increase, but again, need to finalize IBNR. IT support, we talked about that. property and liability we talked about. Utilities, there's line numbers for different utilities throughout. Again, that's based on prior year activities. Debt service is based on the amortization schedule. And then when we go out to bond, and Andre just informed me that the bond sale is pushed back to first week in June. 1 week later. I don't know all the details as of yet, but again, it's just 1 week. The good news on that, I was talking to Davenport today. The rates are actually improving for municipal bonds. So they've been very volatile for the next few months, as we all know. There seems to be a little bit more falling of the orders. So hopefully we'll be able to hit the market at the right time. Indirect chargebacks we talked about, franchise we talked about, and all other expenses is basically just the little sort of budget. So with that, and I'd like to just go through a few slides real quick. And to get more and more granular as we move through.
We should hold our questions to the end.
Well, your questions
Might be answered in the next slide. That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the first slide is just a very high level overview of, and this is just the general fund. So it's a very high overview from 2016 through the 23 budget. So the actuals are for 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20, 21. So you have a good history and progression of what prior year activity. 22 and 23 columns are budget. So the graph below is just that time series, if you will, moving forward. And what this slide really points out to me anyway, is that with the exception of the taxes and other revenues, you see a spike in other revenues, and that it was a debt service. That was a bond proceeds that we received in fiscal year 20. You can see that highlighted in yellow. It went from 14 million up to 22 million, then back to 16. That was about $8 million of bond proceeds. And when we did the ad valorem bond several years ago.
What, can you share a little light on other revenues, what that is in general?
If you, that's it, I will get there.
Put your seatbelt on. We're going.
I'm batting 100%.
Might take a lesson that, Mr. DeFoe.
But besides those two categories and the other categories, relatively flat. And that is the concern that we keep talking about. So, and the other revenues are basically the chargebacks. Back to the electric utility, water utility, that represents the largest component of the revenues. So they're all really in-house generated revenues.
So that's the money coming in, basically the 8%.
Right. And I'll get that, but you'll see more detail with that. So taxes, property taxes that we do not control. Okay. The other revenues that are relatively flat. And if we go and have a slowdown because of recession and whatnot on the real estate side, we're probably going to see the same slowdown or decrease in other activities. So I think this is a very telling slide, and we really need to make sure as we move forward that we are looking out a couple of years, 3, 4, 5 years, versus just trying to get through this fiscal year.
I'm still unclear, maybe others too, on the other revenues. Is that pretty much the 8% coming in from water and electric.
I don't think he got there yet.
Page
It's
five.
not there yet.
Not there
I
yet.
was gonna, other taxes, what are the other taxes? We
That- that-
have, we have sales tax, things, that sort of thing.
So it's better with me, I'll get to the budget.
Would other taxes include our penny sales tax?
No.
No.
It includes the, half cent.
That's what I'm asking.
Right, it does not, that penny sales tax goes to a separate fund.
Okay,
It does not go into the general fund.
okay. Thank you for that clarity.
So if you turn to page
2.
2 of the slides, you'll see the components that make up taxes are, you have gas tax, refuse, electric, utility tax, telecommunications service tax, water service, gas, and propane. And you see the amounts. And again, you can see that they are relatively flat. There's a bit of fluctuation. But over, if you look at 2016, it was $5 million. And in 23, it's $5.3 million. So the total aggregation of those different accounts, you know, have a slow, uptick, but nothing major.
So this is where some would bed tax go into this if we had a hotel? Into that category?
That tax?
Is that what the category would go into?
That
Okay.
comes here, I thought it went to the county.
If, I'm answering if we had that, then that's, I would be the category with positive. But to your point, it does go to the county.
Right now it goes to the county, but if it's here, it goes to us, it'll pass through to us, correct?
Why would that change?
No, I need to get, I think you're right. I think if we're collected here, it goes back to here.
I think it passes through to
No,
us.
William,
The bed tax stays with the tourism and visitor bureau and pay to the county.
right, because we have other motels and hotels here, and we don't get anything off of there.
I'm just thinking of,
So the county has a lot to gain by the Gulf Stream as well.
They do.
Good.
That's why they wrote it, said they want it.
Well, more than-
I do have a question, and I think I already know the answer, because we don't get to, we don't try to too hard to do predictions, but I thought I heard the governor was considering pausing or reducing the gas tax because of a bunch of factors.
It's gonna go into effect in October,
Would
just
that,
before the election.
I know, but would that impact us here? If he does that, then, you know, the $900,000 we're expecting to get as a piece of that would go down
Yes.
substantially?
Oh,
depends upon, you know, it's, as you said, it's hard to predict with any certainty, you know, all the what ifs that
Yeah.
are in the political landscape. So, but your point is something that we need to keep an eye on so that if it does pass, and we're going to have to come back and revise the budget. The permit fees, the special assessments category, this is where you see the business licenses, permits, and review, other permits and fees. Again, the big spike, and I'll defer it to William, but in 2019, you can see that there was a large. spike.
Huge.
I assume that was a project.
Bohemian.
okay.
But everything else again, that category flat. The business license category has a slow uptick over time. $300,000 in those years since 2016, but everything else is relatively flat line.
I have a question. So does all of this go into our general fund?
General fund revenues.
But, and just help me out here, and with the permits and the fees and things like that, isn't that a fund that kind of needs to?
The building permit
Right.
is a separate fund, and that's not reflected here. These
Okay.
are just general fund revenues.
Well, it says, I think the confusion is it says.
Yeah, why does this money come to us?
Because it's all outside of the building. Activity that go, building revenues that go into that specific fund.
Make an example, just so I can,
Sidewalk cafe permits.
thank you.
There you go. Gone down.
All right, so if we turn to page 4. These are the state share revenues. Vehicle rebate, mobile homes, alcohol beverages, entitlement, revenue sharing, the half-cent sales tax, and the county contributions. The county contributions, you can see in 2016, we're up to $1.3 million, $1.4 million. That's really money is going into the pension, police and fire pension. So you see then in 2017, going down to 500 because those revenues did not belong in the general fund. They were obligated to go to the pension trust. So they were reclassified revenues. So if you're just looking from 2017 in that category,
Fairly flat.
it's fairly flat and actually decreased. The vehicle rebate is started with $23,000 and it's gone down to 14. Not significant in dollar amount, but as percentage, it's significant decrease. Mobile home licenses relatively flat. Alcoholic beverage licenses
Gone down.
has gone down. Entitlement, revenue sharing is relatively flat. So again, the recurring statement here is revenues are relatively flat. And then the final account with the other charges, other receipts and other revenue, I broke it down into two groups. So to tie it back, Commissioner McBoy, because I know you're going to do it, you have to add this slide to slide 6 to get to the total on page 1 for this category. But anyway, so charges for services, public safety, service charges, transportation, is basically parking, cultural and recreation fees, fines. You, again, the total amount has gone from $2.8 million up to $2.8 million.
Yeah.
So again, not a whole lot of fluctuation.
So our parking revenue is only $67,000.
That is in the general fund. We have a parking fund,
Oh,
/ beach fund.
that goes up there.
That goes in.
Okay.
So on the first slide, the light blue that's labeled other revenues is the total of page 5 and page 6 graphs.
Yes, sir. But, and I checked the math, so.
Okay, what I'm confused about is this page 1 slide, the increase of the other revenues is almost parallel to ad valorem. It's a substantial increase. I'm ignoring that the 8 million in 2020 as you know, that's not part of the long-term trend. But I'm not seeing much trend in either page 5 or page 6. Local receipts, you know, this is pretty much a wash, stays flat. So what am I missing?
Nothing. It's so,
Because I'm seeing on page 1 an increase from, I'm going to say 12 million to eyeball, let's say 18 million. So 6 million increase over that graph.
Well, the ad valorem and the other taxes are the only two that are going up. Everything else is relatively flat.
The other revenues
The
on
light
page
blue?
1, the light blue. And if I understand right, is, and then maybe I don't understand right, but other revenues, is that the sum of the graphs on page 5 and page 6?
Yeah, you have to go, turn to page 6, you'll see. It's all there that. So I think if we pay a little bit attention to the chart itself versus the graph.
I'm not, we're looking on page 6, that's right, okay.
These are all the different categories, if you will, that flow into that other. So we have the Simpkin Trust, which is a library. Offset. It's pretty close to zero, so there's not a lot we can do with it. It was basically a trust type activity. Sanitation was used in prior years to offset some with some rain that didn't happen. So we're not accounting for those. The beach, golf, and garage have indirect chargebacks that are new for this year. Then the electric, from here we go to the electric, indirect, and franchise, indirect for water, sewer, refuse, stormwater, the regional sewer, the building fund. And then there are some categories for revenue that we don't receive on a consistent basis, and that would be another. Again, one of the big ones, that $8 million in fiscal year 20 was the debt receipt. So
I guess what I'm seeing is a lot of these on initial look pretty flat, but if you look close, there's, you know, over that period, maybe $500,000 on several of them by the time you add all that up. And then there's some big increases in the electric indirect and the electric franchise, or the bigger ones.
Well, that's because we're doing 8% across the board now, correct?
8%. And then you take a look at the history, just if we're taking a look at electric real quick, the indirect was held constant for from 16 through 20. Now it's based on taking those accounts or departments that were referenced on page 1 of the revenue assumptions, and then based on changing the budget compared to the total city budget as the allocation.
Can you go back to the $8 million back in 2020, since we weren't here? You said that was ad valorem?
Yes, this is when the city, right at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, and we were, I'll give you a little bit more of a backstory, if you will. So the city was contemplating what would happen if we didn't have the revenue streams because of slow payments and utilities and slow down here and slow down there. Having a very skinny fund balance throughout the organization, what would happen if we ran down money? So we were talking to Davenport, and I posed the question, can we get, which before a working capital note or bond to repay over a 5-year period to get us through, or have that line of credit, if you will, if we needed it. Because if we waited and there were a bunch of other municipalities looking for the same relief, who knows what would have happened. So the next progression in the thought process was, well, shoot, there are a lot of funds that the city paid for capital out of its own funds, via PAYGO, or out of reserves. Reimburse yourselves that money. So the city spent approximately $8 million of its own money that they really should have borrowed for in retrospect, because we didn't have the fund balances. So we went out to the market and basically repaid ourselves. At $8 million. Along with that, we also did the penny sales tax. And that penny sales tax, you know, it's not, it wasn't a revenue bond per se, but it's using the future revenues of the penny sales tax to pay the debt service for those capital projects that we identified. So that was that process.
So the
So-
8 million was to repair cells for what we had paid out, just,
Out of the general fund.
right? And then so it was like, we didn't have the money, so we were gonna have to borrow it at some point, it sounds like.
No, we did borrow it.
Oh, we did.
But as we know, we paid, we got low and then we borrowed.
Well, again, it was primarily, my primary concern was what would happen if the city ran. out of
Right.
money. So in lieu of doing a working capital note, we just repaid ourselves the money that we paid out of our own banking.
And we're paying the debt service on that now.
But help me understand.
I was just gonna say, so is the money sitting in our fund balance now?
Yes.
Because we paid ourselves back.
Yes,
Oh,
But at the same time, we're making a payment on that note.
Yeah.
So we're paying the interest.
yes, but the city is in much better financial position now than it has been for a long, long time.
I understand, but I guess my question, because it shows an $8 million cushion. So if that went to fund balance, shouldn't that transfer over every year if we haven't used it?
It has.
Okay, because it's not showing, it shows actual 8 million, then it drops down to
You only account
885.
You only account for the revenue once.
So it's sitting in, is it sitting in general fund now, or is it in the rainy day fund?
It's in fund balance, which is part of the rainy day fund.
So,
It's in the fund balance of the general fund. Each fund has its own.
Right. Do we know what that cushion looks like right now of that fund balance?
We're over $10 million,
Okay, good.
including the 8.
including the,
And what's our monthly payment, do you know?
it's a semi-annual payment,
Okay,
off the top of my head.
okay. Thank you for that clarity, because when you said ad valorem, I was like, wait a minute, I don't remember a bond going out in 2020, and obviously we weren't sitting up here then, so thank you for clarifying.
I'm still confused what that happened on. I
The
think,
more you talk to me, the more confused we get.
well, let me see if I can put it in words and see if, and tell me if I got it wrong. We had various expenses around the city that we just paid for. Prior to this 8 million, that we'd been spending it. Maybe we shouldn't have paid for it, however, we did pay for those things, but we did. And you looking at that said, that wasn't really the right way to do that. Let's retroactively sort of fix that problem. We'll go out and we'll borrow 8 million and we'll pay ourselves back. I'm stumbling a little on the pay ourselves. I guess it is in the sense that we borrowed it from Paul and paid Peter for what Peter had spent earlier. But maybe shouldn't have spent the way they did. Is that?
I think
Can I take a stab at this? So it's somewhat, you bought a car and you paid cash for the car.
Right.
And you realize, wow, it's probably best if I had that cash in my pocket,
Right.
because I don't know what could happen that I might need that cash for something else. So I decided to get a loan, put the money in my pocket, and just pay a note and pay that off. So the point is having cash on hand
Right.
in case you need that for unexpected situations. And so I assume the city was in a position of saying, wow, if something happened because you always have unexpected situations that arise that you need to
Hurricane.
have funds to work with. You know, that's the position you want to be in. And so I
Well,
believe.
somebody said, and I don't know who it was, but the comment hurricane.
that would be me.
Yeah, that, you know, on non-event hurricanes, it can cost us into millions.
Yeah.
To do things. If we ever had a Cat 4, Cat 5 hurricane, how quickly would you go through that money?
Yeah, no, I'm not, I just wanted to make sure I understood.
I think you did.
It's a revenue. Yeah, that was very helpful. I just went out and bought.
I think
another
Mr.
car and
Liberty
I'm gonna
wants to
borrow
say
from the mayor. So it comes, it's listed as a revenue here. And the expense doesn't show up quite as visibly. There's a spike because it's a debt payment over some period of time.
I think
5 years, you said, right?
5 years for the, any sales tax. And I think it was the average, maturity for the, ad valorem was 10.
I think Mr. Liberty has something to say. Come on up. Come on, come to the microphone, please.
Bruce and I have discussed this before. For the record, Ed Liberty, Electric Utility Director. One way to look at this in the utility side is what we had done for some period of time is we had basically expensed items that should have been capitalized and spread over a long period of time. So we paid the operating expense in that current year, which means that customer paid, the customer in that year paid for that. Let's say, for example, we put a new pole up. That customer paid for that pole, but the pole is benefiting 30 years with the customers. So by basically paying ourselves back and financing, and making sure that the customers who benefit from that pole in each year that pole is out there are paying for that individual year's use of pole.
Generational.
Right, multi-generational expenses. And what the city had done, we discovered this in utility, Bruce and I talked about this a lot, was that we were expensing things to the current customer, depleting the fund balances at the expense of
Fund balance.
fund balance. It was not very good.
Okay,
But that was since correct.
Thank you.
Sorry, I just wanted a deeper explanation of something that happened when we weren't here. Didn't mean to open
well,
a
it's
can of
important
worms.
to know, be able to
And
look
so that's what we're repositioning ourselves and making new finance policies so that we can put ourselves in that better position.
And not to take the opportunity, but just a little bit of the opportunity. We as municipalities across the board spend a lot of time on the budget. And we really don't look at the most important financial statement, and that is the balance sheet.
Mhm.
Everything that we do is really budget. And, Commissioner McBoy articulated earlier that the budget is probably one of the most important policy documents that are out each year. But a truly disciplined municipality looks and evaluates and understands the balance sheet. So as we move forward, that's another discipline I would like to bring forward, is really understanding the balance sheet and what that means. Then you will truly have a good picture of the city's fiscal position. So I'll end with that.
Are you gonna give that to us somewhere?
It's in your audit,
Okay.
which you received. And there's a whole, and I would read the financial, when you read the financial statements, pay closer attention to the footnotes. By number of them, but you can actually glean a lot of information from reading those footnotes versus just the financial, because it has a whole section on pension, it has a whole section on debt, it has a whole section on receivables, et cetera. So you'll get a lot of information, and rather than just looking at the primary.
Are we really done?
No.
Oh.
I had my hopes up there for a second.
I'm doing the first 4 pages. The rest will go relatively quickly.
If we don't ask questions.
Are you doing?
Look
It is there.
See, I'm ending with that.
I did say that.
I know we jumped that right on that one.
And I think I know the answer to this one. I'm gonna throw it out anyway. Before you are the different budgets for each one. I can go through them right now, or what I recommend is that we schedule time and do one-on-ones, because by the time I go through them, we're gonna be on to the next. So if,
Choice B, please.
can I,
Choice B, on one.
Yeah, can we go home now?
okay.
I'm sorry.
Really captivated.
Budgets are actually my favorite thing.
Yeah.
Numbers and boxes.
All right, so you have a budget for each fund, okay? And then then the next schedule that you'll see are the supplemental budget requests. And unfortunately, I didn't number the pages. But, yeah, so it starts after Fund 530. You see the funds up top.
What
But
page are you,
you see it, Ken.
Yeah, after page 52.
Yes, no, go back, other way, Chris,
page are you?
Chris.
on?
Go
This way.
go to page 52 or 52.
right there.
Yeah,
Okay, and then the next page will be the beginning of the supplemental budget. And if we can make a footnote to do a better, put dividers in, so we can work it easy, because I'll forget. So, right, so you have a summary schedule, all the supplemental budget requests, and then the detail of what those requests mean. And again, we can go through them when we do the one-on-ones, but it's a comprehensive list. And this is a list that I recommend that we sit down, maybe during our one-on-ones and strategize relative to what your individual wants are. And we recreate a supplemental budget request, so that it's all part of the same conversation and not forgotten until late August and go, whoops, we forgot about that. And Commissioner Malega, this is where I'll create one for you for the city.
Did you say Slinky Fund?
Yeah, Slinky Fund.
Stinking,
Thinking,
yes, stinking fund.
put some money into the cemetery. Fund.
Okay.
More to come, but
We're gonna go buy a bunch of slinkies.
and then if you go to the next tab, we get into the capital side. And the capital, we really, it's like, it's only the request, okay? It doesn't show the funding sources and everything else that will go with it. So when you get the budget submissions, come July, you'll see the longer spreadsheets relative to the request and how we anticipate funding. But this is just a very summarized presentation. Goes from 23 out to 27. Excuse it. Filling errors. So I think, and it goes by fund, governmental funds, being the general fund, police, fire, cemetery, library. This is presented and where the asset will be improved versus who would be doing it per se, maybe. So for example, Jamie and his facilities group does a lot of this work, but the work will be done down recreation. Okay, so it's reflected as a recreation, even though Jamie may be doing the work. So again, governmental funding, general fund, police, fire, cemetery, library, street maintenance, the building fund, the beach fund, the golf fund, the garage fleet maintenance, IT fund, and then the parking fund. So those are the governmental activities. Then you get into the enterprise funds, being the electric fund, the water fund, local sewer, the stormwater, sanitation, and regional sewer. So again, that goes 1 through 4. And then the pages 5 through 8 will show the summation for the 5-year plan of the different sources, if you will, of funds.
I have a question for you. So because we have everything broke down, let's just say the beach fund. I see what the beach funds ask are, and then I see, but I don't see where the revenue from the beaches fund. Is that gonna, are we gonna see a page with those funds?
Well, that is going to be a lot of our conversation.
right,
That's the one-on-ones.
after we get,
Well, it's also going to be how are we gonna pay for these things?
Right.
Okay, there's a finite source of funds.
Right.
And a much bigger ask.
Correct.
on the source of funds. So we're gonna have to prioritize and rank the different capital projects. And, find out which ones, when, if you will.
And is this where if we take that $10 million, let's just say from ARPA to pay ourselves back and put it in that little bucket where it's less restricted? Is that where some of those funds could come into play?
Yes, they could.
So it could go to general fund or it could go to garage fleet maintenance? Because it's less restricted, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
But even the restricted part, I mean, it's infrastructure. I mean, a lot of these things we could
Well,
do.
the non-restrictive one is more paying ourselves back for the funding, the monies that we've already spent due to COVID, correct?
Well,
Because they keep changing.
It was lost revenue.
no, you can, it's not a payback requirement. You can use those funds that are non-restricted, you can use them for. other
Anything.
purposes.
Okay,
General government.
general government, maintenance, services, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay,
But even the restricted funds are they're looking heavily at infrastructure, at water infrastructure, things,
Yeah, water is.
big one.
right.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, and then as we talked about on the operating budget, if you really think about what your one would be on the capital side, and then we can do a capital project sheet for anything we'll get into the conversation. So if I don't know what you guys are thinking about, but again, having that information part of the conversations, rather than August, September.
Yeah. You didn't do this last year. This is a new format, isn't it? Or am I just not remembering?
Whole new format.
Yeah, it's much more helpful.
Quite honestly, it's relatively the same format. I think,
It went from 3 levels though to one concise, because we had the binders that were this big and it wasn't as simplified as this is.
you're right about
Yeah.
that. I like complicated.
You're very well aware.
You're talking to,
I showed Commissioner Diaz last year what we had to go through today. I said, this is what we got to get broken into versus.
I appreciate the minimal acronyms, so.
Yeah, this
yeah.
This year, we wanted to, as we mentioned, we wanted to start early, early discussion, because we had quite a bit of approaches to how we're going to prioritize issues. When we talk about the strategic priorities, how that should be tied in the budget. So we wanted to have early conversations as we lead up into the crucial moments of shaping the budget. So, so we're taking advantage of this time. We wanted to provide preliminary information, give general overview, hear your thoughts, and then also have those one-on-ones on the front end. And then when we move into the deeper portion of the budget, once we receive our tax information and incorporate it into the budget, we will then be able to shape it. We'll know our direction at some point as we go into the formal shaping of the budget. So we're taking it in layers and bites, small bites and steps.
Incremental steps.
Yeah.
So if it's all right, with you all, I'll work through Sabine to schedule one.
Yes,
I would recommend 2 hour allowance.
so really 3.
Where is it gonna be? In your office, the space heater?
Just basically.
what?
It's freezing. Have you been to his office?
Mine is on.
Freezing in here.
No, imagine if it's freezing up there compared to here.
I can come down,
Go to the conference room.
Come down to the conference room.
wherever you wish. I would be. But why don't we set the appointments first and then we'll figure out.
Where?
Who did you say it was gonna be you? Our one-on-ones will be with you and Andre, the whole team?
And I will be there. Yeah.
Okay,
Perfect.
so 1-on-4s.
Mr. Lee,
Isn't that like
that'll
basketball?
be easy to schedule. Do you have another, Mr. Liberty, do you have? Sure. Makes sense.
Maybe we should have all department heads there to answer questions.
Oh, God, you can't tie them up
That's a
like that.
lot of time to tie people up.
Well,
If you have a specific question, right?
can you consider this, again, all I want to do is go through. You're going to generate a lot of questions, but I think maybe the first time through, it's just to go through the document itself.
Okay,
Become familiar with the document, become familiar with how things are presented. And then by all means, the second and multiple times thereafter, unequivocally, you're going to sit with the department heads and get into that in 2 weeks. And each one of you are probably going to have a different desire about if you want to go. But my intent, the first time through, no disrespect, was just to lay it out.
Mhm.
Here it is.
here's where we're starting.
Where, exactly. And from there, I love you.
Have at it. So we funded a sustainability position.
No, it's listed in the supplemental request
Oh, yeah, okay.
based on hearing the desire for that position. So that'll be a subject of topic as we file through the priority.
Will there be a quiz?
Yes,
Yes.
2 hours from now.
I just
An open book. It's an open book exam.
It's not multiple choice.
I want to see your work papers and I want to see your.
And guess what? You can't just fill in the little circles on the bubbles either.
Got it. Okay.
The first time I have a little 401k, like 20 years ago when I got it, and I got my first statement, I had never, I'm like, oh, okay. And I said, oh, I guess I made, $400. And so I said, no, actually, when you have parentheses around it,
They just.
that's who you're talking to. Okay.
So you get like 3 hours.
I get the reality. But I mean, this is really much, this format really is much more visual and helpful, and I appreciate it.
Good.
And I like the fact that you've got, the details of each. Now, maybe they were there last year and I just didn't catch them.
Those different booklets, yeah, and they were like different.
Crazy. So this is very helpful, and I'm sure we're all gonna come to it. I like this one, I like that one, this is a project that I would.
Last year was magnifying glass, rulers, highlighters. Horrible.
Horrible, and then I got COVID.
Yes, we did.
Meeting.
Yes.
I got it from the book. It wore me out.
I'm always a fan of visual. I love your graphs. Those are very helpful.
I'm going to create a coffee table edition.
Yeah, really. Last year, was the coffee table book.
I love to be able to see sort of overview, whether it's pie charts or time frames, there are different ways to kind of get a. Because I look at a page like this and I'm just informed. I know what's on it.
Right. No,
Or not.
But I got, yeah,
the other, different people, I go straight to the work paper itself. I don't like charts. Quite honestly.
Yeah.
Because.
I mean, it's right here. It's-
Probably on the chart then.
And some of it should.
Right.
Yeah, but the thing is, and I understand, because I look at a page like this, but if you really concentrate and kind of go into it, it does make much sense. It's a Zen thing. You have to become one with the budget.
We're a very zen group.
And we are very Zen.
Light some
And,
candles, play the right music.
Sage the room before you do it.
But it doesn't show up.
But it really does make sense once you start looking at it.
But Commissioner, to your point, our goal, it might not be realized as full impact this year. But what we want to do is rather than, I don't know if you all know it, but every year we submit our budget to the GFOA,
Mm-hmm.
and the GFOA gives us an award for the presentation. At my perspective view, that should not come out 6 months after the budget is presented. It should become as part of the presentation. And a lot of those graphs and charts are incorporated in that type of, so we're moving in that direction. We need to first, as you know, generate this because the charts and the graphs all follow our this from that. So then,
No, I get that.
right.
Is it hard for you to do, to extrapolate this to charts and graphics? Is that a staff time that we?
I
Never
spent today,
Mm,
and I'm gonna teach Lucy, she probably already knows how, but I spent the better part of 4 hours just doing the charts and. the
That you
graphs.
saw. That's a lot of, that's a lot of extra work for you guys.
But it helps explain.
Yeah.
Some people are visual. And just like we spent 2 hours going through the budget today, And I was trying to explain my concept. And what did I do, Bruce?
Draw a picture.
I drew a picture. It's like, okay, so we got it. And what if it's this high? And I drew bar charts to explain
Yeah.
what I was trying to convey to him. And we connected. We connected. So some people can see visuals better, and you want your budget to be very easy to understand for all. And so you communicate it in different ways and methods.
Are there
So
certain
it's
programs
understandable.
that you have? So if we are in your office or in the student's office and we're doing our 1-on-4s and we say, oh, can we see this like particular thing in a graph? If we can't just select and hit the graph button.
Instagraphed.
Well, I mean, in Excel, if you can generate graphs pretty easily, but I'm.
Very easily, but what you have to do is, in order to build what you're saying, you have to build a chart that is linked to the
Those cells.
numbers. And then from there, it will do it automatically.
Right.
But you have to build those charts first.
Right.
And that's the time consuming piece.
Yeah, you have to know auto formulas, things to put in.
So do I hear Mr. Diaz volunteering over there?
Excel, like I told our city manager earlier, I know Commissioner McVoy loves spreadsheets, but to me, there's a reason why Excel and Excedrin have the same letters, same prefix, but this is very user friendly and I certainly appreciate it's a great starting point, and I really like, we'll do our one-on-ones and I really look forward to hearing the supplementals and ideally meeting with each of our directors and seeing what our staff needs, what our people need and
I'm
priority.
excited about this,
Yeah.
this year. Finally, have the foundation built where it's going to be much more interactive. Downside is going to be much more time consuming.
But the good news is 5 years ago, we were on the headlines for failing to meet deadline on budget. And now here we are having a discussion months ahead of time. So kudos to you and your entire team for getting us here, and to all the directors for getting the information that you need, and the city manager for steering the ship in the right direction. And I'm excited about having the budget information way ahead of time.
How easy is it to go back in time and look at changes that happened in the past? I'm just looking at, one of my biggest concerns is that we don't have a dedicated source for like street maintenance and some of the maintenance that we need to do around the city. We don't have a dedicated, we've been kind of just using one-time sources like penny sales tax to keep that afloat, and eventually that's gonna dry up. But then I look over the past, since 2016 to present day, our budget increased, it looks like $11 million. That means that every year, are we ever like, oh, our budget went up this amount, let's
Take a little bit.
let's take a little bit and like make it a dedicated source for maintenance? Or was it always like, what positions can we fill? What can we do that is gonna eat up that entire?
And that's the conversation that I brought up in the beginning to build future flexibility. And start tweaking the budget to, you need an account for future capital. You need an account for a rainy day fund. You need an account for insurance. So we have to increase our insurance fund balance. We have to have revenue set aside for roadways. Roadways, does it go on a little bit of a tangent? What some communities do, which in the long run is more costly, because what they do is they borrow $1 million, $2 million a year for 20 years, and they do that every year.
Every year.
Every year.
Like we did our $40 million bond. They do that 20 million every
They
year.
do $2 million or whatever that increment is, but they borrow for their road maintenance every year. Well, in the first 10 years, it was a 20-year note. Okay, you're saving money, okay? But in the long run, from 10 years forward, not only are you paying the premium or the principal down, you're also paying debt service. And
Right, a lot of it.
so,
Right,
yeah.
so you're, no,
Constantly staying in debt.
It's like a revolving credit card.
yeah, so you're always, and so that we're trying to, we don't want to get into a process where we have to borrow money for repeated needs.
Right.
But it's not just your roads. It's every capital asset that we own.
Maintenance.
I don't want to pick on the electric utility, but the electric utility is a great example. Think about where the community would be if not, it had the foresight back from the 70s or 80s, whenever it was, to put dollars aside for future capitalization versus waiting 30 years and doing what we're doing today. We need to avoid that situation so that you put money where it needs to be. And capital is a very expensive, so when.
And it's not
capital-
exciting. It's not like, yay, we got a new savings for the future years.
Exactly.
Right.
But, there's more money, if you think about it, there's more money going into the capital budget now than there is into the operating budget.
Because it's been delayed, it's been so much deferred maintenance.
Right.
It's just so easy not to do anything and
Right.
let the next guy do it.
When is the road bond paid? When does that expire? The 40 million?
Payment,
Yeah, when does it expire?
It's a 20-year note, so you.
That was 17?
15 years.
Was it done 17? Who did it? 18?
Andre, do you remember?
Yeah.
The robot?
When did it start? The initial year? It's about 2015, 16, 17.
So, but when's the maturity?
pop quiz.
You don't-
After us.
None of us will be here then.
So,
Have it in his name.
it's a 20-year note.
And this discussion of.
Yeah, we definitely won't be here then.
This discussion, I totally agree with you that things that are known repeated expenses, you've got to do maintenance on whatever.
Mhm.
Borrowing money to do that isn't really sensible. You should figure that out of your operating. That's like borrowing money for groceries. Well, it's one thing to borrow money to put a new roof on, okay, but you don't do that every year.
Capital
But
versus operating.
that's where I like to see some of the visual, because if we're gonna try to do more of that, to actually make sure that Jamie's got $1.5 million a year to keep up with the roads. We're gonna have to look at, all right, maybe, what are we gonna cut to make sure that happens? And do we all agree that, or are we just gonna drive on the roads and make do because we want to do something else? Those are the difficult back and forths that
Well,
we.
you're absolutely right, but there's the other side of the ledger here is your income.
Mhm.
Okay, and we've talked a lot about the expense side, but we also have to think outside the box, if you will, on the revenue side.
And certainly, we've all talked about grants. Let's make sure we do grants.
Grants are.
They're not gonna be for roads.
Yeah, grants are a one-time revenue, and you don't want to embed grants into your operating budget, because then you create a structure.
No, but your capital improvement stuff, and you
Yes.
get a grant,
Exactly.
you're right.
Those are more eligible for that.
But the reality is, well, the last 2 years is a change, but typically, public safety and that kind of stuff, there's a lot of grant money. There's typically minimal grant money for operating type activities.
Right.
Okay, so it's hard to find those grant opportunities.
For operating, yeah.
Right. A lot of what we're doing is operating. Okay, and, we say that we need to have, ongoing maintenance as part of the operating budget. It's hard to find a grant for those type of activities.
Yeah, no,
It's hard to find money within the budget right now and cut other programs and activities to put into those, because arguably those programs and activities are needed. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in the budget today, argument. So we need to not just look at the expense side and how do we tighten the budget. We need to take a look at have the conversation on what we can do with the current revenue structure and make possible future revenue structures. Okay, and move that conversation. Someone that's going to be a very difficult conversation. Do we increase parking? Do we increase, do we expand parking, for example? I'm just talking, off the top of my head, but those are the kind of, activities that we have to take a look at and potentially others.
And do we establish a new revenue stream? I know we've talked about, are there things in the electric utility, like such as solar maintenance repair, like other things that we can do so we're not solely relying on property taxes and at the whims of the market there. And I know a lot of conversations around ARPA was not just use this money to plug into your current CIP, but is there a way to leverage this money to maybe start something new that can pay out?
Carmen and I were talking about that today. Seed money for, programs,
Yeah.
so that you create a revenue stream based on that.
I have a question. Speaking of ARPA, do we have a workshop scheduled about ARPA funds yet?
No, but we need to.
We need to, because
Right. And
tied into this.
it's tied to the budget, it's tied to what we talked about, the strategic priority plan. And so when we schedule that, we can talk about that.
So
And then
when are we saying that might happen?
we'll put a date together very soon. We need to.
Okay, because I'm just thinking that chunk of July that I'm gonna be out.
That's true. That's true. So if you want to schedule something at the end of June, we can,
Let's do it, just even if it's just this kind of conversation.
yes, we'll do that.
Thank you. Anything else?
No,
Anybody? else?
William, you
Can
look
we-
like you want to say something.
I got a revenue stream. Every time we hit a light, we put $1 in the bucket.
I have a better idea. Wait a minute. Make it a gated community, we charge to come into Lakewood. Put gates down, right? You gotta pay to get in. This place is so great.
No, we could just put a toll. We should make it,
I mean, yeah, toll.
arm.
Yeah.
Oh, we don't own those streets. Okay.
You got to pay to get out.
You gotta pay it out. You can come in, but you the Hotel California.
But the revenue conversation is very important, as Bruce mentioned. We need to start thinking about how do we expand those revenue opportunities? Because certainly, really, the city is a service organization.
Right.
And so we're service oriented, and that includes we're labor intense. Most of our expenses are in the personnel expense.
Like you and I were speaking today, we were talking about sponsorship opportunities. And like, there's a reason why the stadium names change every 3 or 5 years.
Right.
Because they sell the naming rights. We have a golf course. I'm like, who cares if it's LPGA's, whoever's golf course? We own it. Let them slap a name on it. Same thing for the oceanfront property. We've got the ability to make huge sponsorship money in this city that is constantly coming into the general fund.
Right.
As long as we don't sell anything and they just get to slap a name on it.
Right, so the services that we provide are labor intense. And certainly you want to be able to have the revenues to cover those expenses that it takes to provide those particular services. So as we've talked about, example, parking. I know that's a discussion that'll be coming down the line as we talked about our visioning of downtown and other issues. We need to talk about if we do certain services, if we perform certain services, we want the fees to sustain those.
Yeah, like $1
Service.
million we got to give to the Bohemian for creating parking for us.
Right.
But then we'll charge for the parking, so hopefully.
But how long will it take us to regain that $1 million back? 10-year return on investment?
We just recently learned about that. And I have always said, and I know you didn't like the idea, but I have, before we were elected, we were talking about revenue, how to make more. I think, why don't we, and apparently the city attorney has some reason.
On why we don't sell our water?
Why are we not marketing this water and selling it like Nestle? Or a better example would be a company.
I happen to look.
That is,
Nestle's what?
Because Nestle's would then sue us for restraint.
yeah.
What is that?
Since happened, Vero Beach tried to market their own bottled water.
And?
They got sued by Zephyr Hills and shut them down because it is in a way a restraint of trade because you're impinging on the profits of private
I
organizations.
thought we had a free market.
Yeah, I was gonna say, why can't we be right next to?
I didn't hear the last part of your, we
That's why the
impinge.
city attorney is hesitant to do that because there was case law already in that regard.
What about those, when you go to Publix and you bring your own jug in? Because I also don't love the idea of contributing to single-use
No,
plastics.
that was
But
weird.
what if we had the big jug, the refillable jugs, and we just put it outside Bravo, outside of Publix, and people could come and get our water there, but we weren't marketing it and.
Those-
What if we just had the
Those are
machine,
private.
not the jugs?
Those are private companies, so
What if we just had a machine that was our water?
I think the point is those are private companies and we're a government. So
Well, I don't know about that case.
they would not, first, I would just say I would not want to get in the market of providing single-use plastic bottles.
But refillable drugs.
But we need to make some money, guys.
But I mean, even taking like you said, the refillable drugs, but making it to where they could gain access to our water at our electric utility.
Well, aren't they though? Well, right, because if you go to Publix with a 5-gallon jug, you're buying our water, but you're buying it from the machine. You're
That's
paying for
filtering
that machine that's filtering it.
Right.
So we
So
would
if we
have,
had our own machines that filtered our own water and put it out, then we could be charging for that. Well,
I think what it comes down to is,
you find that humorous, Mr. Waters?
I think,
We need you to make more money.
We don't have, we have great water.
I drink it straight from the tap. There's-
I totally do.
I think what it comes down to, and this is getting in the weeds, but we're gonna be creative on finding new revenue.
Yes.
I mean, we see how successful street painting is. We see how our band shell is maybe not being used, and maybe there's a partnership there to find. Imagine a music festival or something once a month at Bryant, and that would bring.
Lauren Bennett just had a heart attack.
That would.
Well, it would give us more revenue. to-
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
One,
That might be appropriate for a partnership or somebody who can do it at a lower cost and still bring it the same.
and there are actually a couple of people sort of interested in talking about that, so I'm chatting away. Does anybody have anything else?
could we put a little guy, like a person at the beach where the boats are put into the boat ramp and charge more to have that person there? Because some marinas have a person there watching
Right.
the boats and the trailers and the cars, and they charge more money than we do. We've got to find revenue.
I think we need to have a department competition. Have.
Bring us the best ideas for revenue
Get some more money.
in your spare time. You know what?
We'll get something.
You could sign up to learn how to drive a street
Yeah.
sweeper and pay Public Works.
Suggestion boxes.
Yeah.
Someone come up with a cost saving
Mhm.
measure or revenue generating measure.
Mhm.
And it is implemented, yes.
We have a hackathon every year at my company where you just take a week and throw everybody in a room just to like explore a bunch of different ideas, and then they all present them, and one or two actually makes it into.
Mhm.
Like a charrette.
Yeah.
But we have to do the sunshine, that's the annoying.
Well, we don't have to do it.
It's staff.
Staff and directors get to do it.
I can tell the
They look
enthusiasm.
so excited.
Cheers coming from the audience. Overwhelming.
You're gonna need an extra one.
In Key West. What if it's not here? You actually. learn.
Starting to sound better.
Okay, any,
There are actually a number of things. Like utility, to build the building system, be able to build it. But there's some things that we.
All right.
yeah,
Quite normal. Like, other products and services.
yeah, I mean, it's, everyone is struggling and we are struggling, it's like, we're just in the same boat as everybody else. A jar of mayonnaise is more than it was, a year ago.
That's right.
For everybody, and it's hard because sometimes we have to pass down that to the citizens, but for the people that use it. But.
I do have one more
we
question.
Go bankrupt.
Are we done transferring bank accounts yet? That's been taking like the longest thing in history I've ever heard of.
No, we're still working on it. We are further along the process now.
Can somebody explain to me why it's taking 6 months for us to transfer?
Time frame for
We are looking at probably the next 8 weeks. Part of it, the different people other than sitting the bank themselves have to be involved to move everything over.
Just like write a check out to the
I
next.
could just like send Jamie to go talk to somebody to make this happen. I'm like, what?
There are some other, we have third party groups that we have to get involved in the process, and there are multiple
Really?
pieces to it, including processing. So there are different parts of the process that have to be considered while we're making the switch. But we have the council set up. We're starting to communicate with the states so that they're aware that we are changing things so that we don't get deposits lost anywhere. Chase
All right.
is aware of the different parts that we want to transfer over. We're in the testing phase, or we're 2 or 3 days away from testing our ability to process payments in the new account. So we are moving further along. To answer your question, we're about 6 to 8 weeks away.
You always give me 8 weeks, Andre. That's your magic number.
It's like whenever you're traveling in South Florida, everything is 20 minutes.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Well, the reason I ask is because one of the revenues that we're missing is one of our metering companies, and we've all talked about this multiple times, the parking metering. We're losing that end user fee because we weren't gonna switch until we switch bank accounts. So that's revenue that's just going out the window because we're still waiting on a new bank account.
Well, we had to wait till we switched bank accounts because I can't remember specifically, but there's an issue with setting up that user fee with Bank of America. There's some other things
It's
involved.
complicated.
Corporate America, good lord.
One thing, a request.
I'm gonna get a
I
shirt that
guess
says
to
it's
make a request,
complicated.
But, I too am struck that on page 1, the overall budget from 2016 to now went up by quite a noticeable amount. I guess if we start to actuals, it'd be 16 to 21 over 5 years, that it went up roughly 8 million. And then the budget goes up a little bit more. It would be for the actuals, so 16 to 21. It would be useful to me to know, get some idea of, well, all right, 8 million more came in. What did we do with that? What did we do more by 2021 that we weren't doing in 2016?
Yeah,
And I'm sure it's 1,000 cuts kind of thing, that there's all sorts of stuff. We did a little bit more of that, a little bit less of that.
More hiring.
I can't tell you specifically, but for the last 4 years, 5 years, there has not been any incremental increase in your activities.
They just got more expensive.
More expensive. 3 years ago, they had 4 years ago, maybe, they had to do cuts. There were actual cuts in the budgets, including people, including staff. So it's not that we're, I think last year was the first year that we added staff in the budget, since I've been here anyway. So it's not like we're adding new programs and new people, and it's, that $8 million increase over those 10 years is a increase in stuff that we do. It's just keeping the normal business going, and that's what scares me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's scary.
It is scary because I don't know what the numbers work out to, but that sounds a lot more than, say, in water. The number that's always been in my head was plan on about 3% a year increase. Just, chlorine goes up and this goes up and that goes up, but it's nice and slow and steady. It goes up. You gotta raise your rates. You gotta track that at some point. But this looks
Like a
Would you
25% increase. If we start at 30,
You're up to
Two.
42,
8 divided by 32 is 4. So we're talking,
30%.
yeah, that's,
that seems like quite a bit.
But remember in that, okay? And I wouldn't even say salaries were the primary driver. But you have pension, okay? Pension is a huge cost. Okay, that can go up. That last year, I think, went up over $1 million just in 1 year. Okay, and the fact that it's going up very marginally this year is probably saving the budget. Okay, from the hard reviews that we normally have to do. This year's budget came in basically break even. Okay, it's $1,000 surplus or something. Okay, typically at this time.
we'll have to fight over what we can do
You're
with
looking at
$1,000.
$1 deficit. Okay, and trying to figure out how we're gonna do this and how we're gonna do that. Okay, and it's not until mid-July, August timeframe that, all the pieces of the puzzle can come together. So it's those activities that the city does not have control of. That is driving us.
So, I mean, if we took these pages of all these numbers, would, the income and the outgoing, would that mean, would we be able to pay for it, just those things, without the supplemental? Well, I guess my question is, how are we gonna find money for supplemental stuff if we're barely paying for the regular stuff?
I think you are in pretty good shape.
Mhm.
You know, again, some of these numbers are going to move, so I don't want to say unequivocally, take this to the bank. But I think you're in pretty good shape
For some supplemental,
before supplemental.
before,
And the total supplemental looked like it's 800 or 800 to 1 million.
The supplementals are going to be the people and all that kind of stuff.
we do them in ARPA.
That's what I'm saying, that's where that ARPA money ties back into, because when we sat here that one workshop,
I
I
mean,
remember Brian said, well, I'll take $1 million, and James, I could use $1 million.
Well, just be careful. And I'm going to emphasize this, and I'm going to keep banging my this. Do not put ARPA into your operating.
No.
expense.
No, no, we're talking about
Understand.
capital.
If you
yeah.
hire somebody a position, you're committing infinitely fewer. And the ARPA is a one-shot pop.
You are creating a structural deficit.
right, yeah, no, we understand
No,
that.
no, we got that.
So, but I mean, that's roads, that's
We're
infrastructure,
talking
stuff that we have here that we.
city, we're talking about capital.
Anybody have anything else? It's almost done.
Thank you to everybody who's being quiet.
Thank
You guys are just like listening to us hash it out over here.
I know,
We're the only ones.
hundreds of
out
watching at home.
A little bit. We're gonna get you guys out of here early.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Steph. I know a lot of work goes into this. And we very much appreciate it, and we will do our best to understand and work with it. Thank you.
Yes.
Do I have a
Look
motion?
forward to our 1-on-4s.
You don't need a motion for.
We don't. to adjourn?
See here.
And here the mayor was doing the right thing.
Thank you, team.
I remember the roll call.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. We're just gonna go rogue.